The announcement board flickered above my head, flight numbers changing in green digital letters, and I sat on that cold metal chair in Terminal B with my single suitcase between my knees, watching the last traces of my aunt's perfume disappear into the crowd. She hadn't even looked back, not once. "You're disgusting," she had whispered, leaning down so only I could hear, her manicured nails digging into my shoulder. "Your mother was right to get rid of you. Now stay here. Security will figure out what to do with you." I was 14 years old, alone in an airport 3 states away from home, with $40 in my pocket and a lie so brutal it had destroyed everything I'd ever known. The lie wasn't mine. It had been told about me by my cousin Rachel, whispered into my aunt's ear just 30 minutes before we were supposed to board the plane back home together. Rachel had looked me in the eye that morning, smiled sweetly, and said nothing that raised any suspicion. But behind my back, she had constructed something so cruel, so carefully designed, that it would take me 12 years to understand its full scope. What did Rachel say? What lie was so devastating that my own aunt, the woman who had volunteered to take me in after my parents' divorce, could look at a 14-year-old girl and abandon her in a crowded airport with absolute certainty that the child deserved it? And how did the truth eventually come back around to destroy the person who created it? Because here is what nobody knew that day. Not Rachel, not my aunt, not even me. That 14-year-old girl sitting alone in Terminal B, terrified and heartbroken, was going to become the very person Rachel would one day desperately need, and she had no idea. None at all. My name is Nora Ellis, and before that summer, the biggest problem in my life was whether I would pass my 8th grade math exam. I was 14, quiet by nature, the kind of girl who read books during lunch and observed people more than she interacted with them. I had dark hair that curled when it rained, a gap between my front teeth I was self-conscious about, and a laugh that came out too loud when something genuinely surprised me. My parents, David and Linda Ellis, had married young, loved fiercely, and fallen apart quietly. Their divorce happened when I was 11, not with screaming and broken plates, but with long silences and closed bedroom doors. My father moved to Portland. My mother kept the house, kept the sadness, and kept drinking. By the time I was 13, my mother's drinking had become something I managed around rather than something I confronted. I learned to pour her wine before dinner so she wouldn't snap. I learned to check if she'd fallen asleep on the couch before locking up. I learned to make my own lunches, do my own homework, and pretend at school that everything was perfectly normal at home. My father called every Sunday, talked for exactly 15 minutes, and asked questions that showed he didn't really know what was happening in my daily life. He had a new family now, a wife, a baby daughter, a clean new apartment that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. I visited him every other weekend and spent most of the time feeling like a guest in someone else's happiness. Then there was my aunt, my mother's older sister, Margaret Chen. Aunt Margaret was everything my mother wasn't. Organized, ambitious, successful. She ran a consulting firm, lived in a beautiful house in Connecticut, and projected an image of complete control over every aspect of her life. She had one daughter, my cousin Rachel, who was 16 and had inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and added something darker to it, a talent for reading people and using what she found against them. Rachel and I had never been close. When we saw each other at family gatherings, she was polite but distant, studying me with eyes that felt like they were cataloging information. I didn't understand that look then. I was too young to recognize it for what it was, someone deciding how to use you. The summer I turned 14, my mother hit rock bottom. One Tuesday morning, I came downstairs to find her passed out on the kitchen floor, an empty bottle of vodka next to her, and the stove still on from something she'd tried to cook the night before. I turned off the stove, dragged a blanket over her, and called Aunt Margaret. What happened next moved quickly, the way emergencies do when adults finally pay attention. My mother was taken to a rehabilitation facility. Aunt Margaret drove up from Connecticut, packed me a bag, and brought me back to her house with the kind of efficiency that suggested she'd been preparing for this possibility for a long time. "You'll stay with us until your mother gets better," she told me on the drive, her hands perfectly positioned at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. "Rachel is excited to have a cousin to spend the summer with." Rachel was not excited. The first night at Aunt Margaret's house, Rachel came into the guest room where I was unpacking and sat on the edge of the bed, watching me with that cataloging look. "So your mom's an alcoholic," she said, not a question. "She's getting help," I replied carefully. "That's what they tell you," Rachel said with a shrug that seemed practiced. "Your mom says your mom has been like this for years. Everyone knows." I didn't respond, focusing on folding my clothes with hands that trembled slightly. "This must be really embarrassing for you," she continued, and there was something in her voice that sounded almost like sympathy but wasn't. "Don't worry, your secret is safe with me." She smiled and left the room. I should have recognized that smile. It was the smile of someone who had just acquired something valuable. Over the next 3 weeks, life at Aunt Margaret's house settled into a routine. I helped with chores, stayed quiet, tried to be as little trouble as possible. Rachel and I spent time together, swimming in the backyard pool, watching movies, sometimes talking late into the night. Rachel was charming when she wanted to be, funny and perceptive in ways that made me feel seen. I opened up to Rachel more than I'd opened up to anyone in months. I told her about my mother's drinking, about feeling invisible, about how lonely I was. I told her things I'd never told anyone. Looking back, I understand now that Rachel was gathering ammunition, but at 14, all I felt was grateful that someone was finally listening. The trip to the airport happened at the end of August. Aunt Margaret had planned a vacation to visit her mother in Florida, and I was supposed to fly back to my mother's house because the rehab facility had reported progress, and my mother was supposed to be coming home. Aunt Margaret drove me to the airport herself, Rachel in the back seat scrolling through her phone. The drive was quiet, almost pleasant. Rachel glanced up once and gave me a small wave, and I waved back, feeling something close to warmth. We got to the airport, checked in, and sat in the terminal, waiting for our respective flights. Aunt Margaret's flight to Florida was boarding first, and mine was 40 minutes later. We sat together in silence for a while, and then Rachel excused herself to use the restroom. She was gone for less than 5 minutes. When she came back, everything changed. She leaned close to Aunt Margaret and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I watched Aunt Margaret's face transform, confusion giving way to shock, then horror, then something cold and absolute. Aunt Margaret turned to me, and the woman I'd been living with for 2 months, the woman who had taken me in and fed me and given me a bed, looked at me like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "What Rachel just told me, is this true?" "I don't know what she said," I responded, genuinely confused. "Stop lying." Her voice rose, attracting glances from nearby passengers. "Rachel told me everything about what you've been doing, about the things you stole from my house, about the way you've been behaving when I'm not watching." My stomach dropped. None of this was true. I hadn't stolen anything. I hadn't done anything except try to be a good guest. "Aunt Margaret, I don't know what she's talking about. I would never—" "Rachel has no reason to lie," she cut me off, her jaw tight. "You do. You've been lying since you got here. About your mother, about yourself, about everything." She stood up abruptly, grabbing her carry-on. "I'm not spending another second near you. You can wait here for your flight. Security will sort this out." She turned to Rachel, who was watching with wide, concerned eyes that fooled everyone except me. "Come on, sweetheart, let's board our plane." Rachel looked at me over her shoulder as they walked away. The concern on her face vanished the instant Aunt Margaret turned her back, replaced by something I'll never forget as long as I live. Satisfaction. Pure, deliberate, satisfied cruelty. And then they were gone, swallowed by the crowd of travelers, and I was alone. I sat in that airport for 3 hours. Eventually, a kind airline employee noticed me crying and helped me contact the authorities. Child Services was called. My father was contacted. By the time anyone reached my mother's house, she wasn't there, still in rehab. My father flew from Portland the next morning, and the look on his face when he found me in that airport was something I carry with me still. He held me so tightly I couldn't breathe, and he kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry," like a prayer. I went to live with my father full-time after that. The adjustment was painful and slow. His new wife, Karen, was kind but unsure of how to handle a traumatized teenager. His baby daughter, my half-sister Emma, was only 8 months old and knew nothing of the complicated family dynamics swirling around her. I was angry, confused, and deeply wounded, not just by what happened at the airport, but by what it revealed, that the people who were supposed to protect me would abandon me based on nothing more than another person's words. I didn't know why Rachel had done it. For months afterward, I replayed that afternoon over and over, searching for a motive that made sense. Was she jealous? Did she resent having me in her house? Was she testing her power over her mother? I never found a satisfying answer. Eventually, I stopped looking for one. I focused instead on surviving, on school, on slowly learning to trust again. My mother called from rehab, sober and devastated, crying about what had happened. I forgave her in small pieces over years, the way you forgive someone who hurt you not through cruelty but through weakness. By the time I was 18, I'd built a quiet, stable life. I'd gotten good grades, earned a scholarship, and was studying psychology, drawn to understanding human behavior and the motivations behind cruelty. I specialized in trauma counseling eventually, finding purpose in helping others navigate the kind of pain I knew intimately. By my late 20s, I was a licensed therapist with a small practice and a reputation for working with teenagers who'd experienced family abandonment and betrayal. I'd built a life from the rubble of that afternoon in Terminal B, and I did it largely on my own. Then, 12 years after that day in Terminal B, Rachel Chen walked into my office. I almost didn't take her as a client. When the name appeared on my intake form, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Rachel Chen, age 28, referred by another therapist who was retiring. The intake notes said she was struggling with severe anxiety, relationship difficulties, and guilt she couldn't identify the source of. I could have referred her elsewhere. I could have called her and explained that we had a personal history that made therapy inappropriate. Instead, something made me agree to see her. Maybe it was my training telling me that everyone deserves help. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the belief I'd spent my entire career building, that healing is possible, even between people who have every reason to hate each other. Rachel sat in my office on a gray Tuesday afternoon, and for the first few minutes, she didn't recognize me. I'd changed significantly since I was 14, grown taller, cut my hair differently, shed the awkward teenager I'd been. But when she finally looked up from her hands and really saw me, the color drained from her face. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Nora?" "Hello, Rachel." The silence that followed was one of the longest of my life. Rachel's hands were shaking, her eyes filled with tears that spilled before she could stop them. "I didn't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know you became a therapist. I had no idea you were here." "I know," I said, calmly, "and I need you to know something before we go any further. You don't have to stay. You can leave right now and I won't hold it against you. But if you stay, I will be honest with you, completely honest, about everything." She stayed. Over the next few sessions, Rachel told me everything. The lie she'd told at the airport, that I'd been stealing from the house, that I'd been behaving badly, was calculated and deliberate. She'd been jealous of the attention I was getting, resentful that her mother had opened to me in ways she rarely did, and angry that I'd been brought into their family without her consent. She'd told herself it was justified, that I didn't belong there, that she was protecting their family. But the guilt had never left. It had grown over the years, quietly poisoning every relationship she'd ever had, making her unable to trust anyone because she knew what she was capable of. I've been trying to figure out why I can't feel happy, why every good thing I have feels tainted, and it's because of what I did to you. I've been carrying it for 12 years, and I never apologized. I never even admitted it to myself. I looked at this woman who had caused me so much pain, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not a monster, but a scared, broken person drowning in consequences she'd spent a lifetime trying to ignore. "Rachel," I said gently, "what you did was cruel. It caused real damage. But holding on to the guilt isn't penance. It's just another way of staying stuck. Real healing starts with accountability, with facing what you did and accepting that you can't change it, only learn from it." She nodded, crying silently. "I'm so sorry, Nora. I'm so incredibly sorry." "I know." And for the first time in 12 years, I felt the last piece of that airport afternoon finally release its grip on me. I'm sitting in my office now, the same one where Rachel cried and apologized and began the slow work of healing herself. Outside the window, the afternoon sun is painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, and it feels like something new beginning. Rachel and I are not friends. We probably never will be. But she's healing, truly healing, in a way she couldn't before she faced what she'd done. And I'm healing too, in ways I didn't realize I still needed to. Because here's what that 14-year-old girl in Terminal B didn't know. The abandonment, the cruelty, the brutal lie, all of it led her somewhere. It led her to study psychology, to understand human pain, to dedicate her life to helping others find their way through darkness. It led her to become exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. Someone who chooses compassion over revenge, understanding over anger, healing over hatred. Rachel had no idea when she whispered that lie in the airport that she was helping create the very person who would one day help her heal. Sometimes life works like that. The cruelest moments plant the seeds of the most beautiful growth. Not because the cruelty was necessary or deserved, but because we choose what to do with the pain. We choose whether it destroys us or transforms us. I chose to be transformed. And if you're sitting in your own Terminal B right now, alone and abandoned and wondering if any of it means anything, I want you to know this. It does. Your pain has a purpose, not because someone designed it that way, but because you get to decide what it becomes. And the person who hurt you had no idea what they were actually creating. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't hurting them back, it's becoming someone extraordinary from the wreckage they left behind.